The Democratic National Convention is next week, but the Democrat Party will crown Kamala Harris as their nominee, despite her not having received a single vote in the primaries. Now, despite preemptively confirming Harris as the nominee by virtual roll call earlier this month, all is not well in the city of Chicago. Come Monday, it appears that trouble is brewing. There is an expected 100,000 people that will descend upon the city as the lunatic fringe of the Democrat Party plans to make their voices heard in the Windy City. To discuss this in greater detail, we're going to pull up an article from the New York Post, which updated on this story this morning. They write, roughly 100,000 anti-Israel protesters expected to descend on Chicago to steal spotlight from the DNC Harris Walz ticket. Roughly 100,000 far-left Israel-hating protesters will be descending on Chicago this week, sowing chaos as Democrat leaders rally around their new presidential ticket. At least 7 large rallies and marches are set to take place in the Windy City, while the McCormick Place Convention Center hosts Democratic National Convention, organizers said. And other rallies are also expected, even though the organizers have not yet scored necessary city permits. The causes run the gamut of radical leftist causes, including backing Hamas terrorists and ending U.S. aid to Israel. Now, they are doing this, by the way, despite Harris kowtowing to them by picking Walz instead of the much more popular Josh Shapiro. You see, Shapiro, despite being a popular figure in both in the Democrat Party and in Pennsylvania, which is an all-important battleground state in this upcoming election, he was facing criticism from radical leftists and the radical progressives over his stance on Israel and his support for school vouchers, which was giving parents choice and where they can send their kids to school, which to me seems perfectly reasonable, but what do I know? Anyway, the radicals on the left were frothing mad about these two issues. But it was more than that. The growing racism, or anti-Semitism if you prefer, which has been fostered and coddled for decades within the Democrat Party, has reached a fevered pitch. It became such a problem for the left that Shapiro's Jewish background played a major role in Harris's decision to abandon him and pick Walz instead. Even members of the mainstream media voiced their concern. CNN commented on this. Let me pull up the article here. So this was written by Harry Enton. This was back on August 6th. Okay. And the article reads, the math behind why Harris picked Walz and why she may regret it. I'm going to skip down to the bottom here. This is the important piece. He says, a selection not without risk. The big question now is whether Harris left points on the board by choosing Walz instead of Shapiro. Minnesota is likely not going to be competitive this fall. No Republican nominee for president has carried the state since 1972. Walz is from Minnesota. It's Democrats' longest presidential winning streak outside of Washington, D.C., and polling in the North Star State since Harris entered the race has shown that the streak is likely to continue. Pennsylvania, on the other hand, is almost certainly a must-win state for Harris if she wants to be president. In fact, it is probably the most important swing state this cycle, and the polling there has been very tight. Shapiro currently holds a 61% favorable rating in Pennsylvania and outperformed Biden's 2020 baseline by 14 points in 2022. Whether that would have been enough to propel a Harris-Shapiro ticket in Pennsylvania this fall is a question mark, though political science literature suggests it very well could have. And then scrolling down a bit more, he writes, if Harris ends up losing Pennsylvania and the election by a small margin, it will be one of history's great what-ifs. Did she not choose Shapiro because she was afraid of the online left? So there we have the acknowledgement of the undercurrent of fear that the left has in regards to the lunatic radicals within their own party that they have fostered for all these decades. And they shouldn't be surprised about this. You cannot encourage evil behavior, violent riots, looting, murder, like those allowed by the hate groups Black Lives Matters and Antifa, and expect to be able to control them for long. If the Democrat National Convention turns into a hellscape, the Democrat Party will have no one to blame but themselves. Anyway, let's get back to the Washington Post article. They go on to write, the convention runs Monday through Thursday, but the protests begin Sunday with a march towards Grant Park organized by the pro-abortion, gay rights organization, bodies outside of unjust laws. The biggest turnout is expected at March on the DNC 2024 rally slated for Monday and Thursday, organized by a coalition of 125 anti-Israel groups, including the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression and the U.S. Palestinian Community Network. Over 30,000 people are expected to attend the Monday march, according to multiple reports. Now, the chair of the U.S. Community Network told the Washington Post it won't go soft on the Dems, despite Vice President Harris replacing Biden, who the group branded Genocide Joe for backing Israel, on the top of the ticket. He said, "Our target is the Democrat Party, and the leadership of the party, and Killer Kamala is one of them." Representative Jeff Van Drew, Republican, said that there's little difference between the ideology of the protesters and the top of the ticket. He said, "The supporters of the Kamala Harris-Tim Walz presidential ticket are so radical that regardless of what happens at the DNC convention, the prospects are frightening. If the radical left is quiet and happy, it demonstrates just how crazy the Democrat leadership has become, because the most radical of radicals are pleased with the direction they are taking. If disruptions take place and the protests turn extreme or violent, it will demonstrate just how unhinged these people are. It's a no-win for America." Former New York Republican gubernatorial candidate Lee Zeldin accused Harris of trying to earn support, quote, of the rapidly expanding number of pro-Hamas activists, end quote, and predicted Jewish Americans would be among the biggest losers if she wins the presidency. Zeldin said, "Here's the thing with these pro-Hamas lunatics. If you feed their hate, they will only get emboldened to triple down. There's a 100% chance that they continue to expose their own ugliness during the DNC. It's a lose-lose for Jewish Americans who should be terrified of what a Kamala Harris administration would look like." At least 3 other DNC-related rallies will include organizers demanding an end to U.S. aid in Israel, including the Chicago Coalition for Justice in Palestine March Wednesday, that will also call for ending Israel's war efforts in Gaza, according to the Chicago Tribune. In 1968, bloody riots filled the streets of Chicago when the city notoriously hosted the DNC at the height of the Vietnam War. The threat of protests at DNC 2024 hung over Chicago once it was tapped to host this year's Lefty Love Fest, and it grew even more after Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel and the ensuing war in Gaza. Harris and her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, already won the party's nomination in an early virtual roll call, but they'll get to give their official acceptance speeches in person at the convention. Now, law enforcement is taking steps for security here. This includes agencies like the incompetent Secret Service and the corrupt FBI. They are preparing for the protests, which are considered a national security event. And they have been monitoring plans and potential threats, but have not identified any specific threats at this time. Businesses in downtown Chicago have also been taking precautions, and many storefronts are being boarded up in anticipation of this event becoming violent, and that's probably a good anticipation. So buckle up for next week. I'm expecting this to get weird and wild. From the To Be Frank show, I am Adrian. Thanks for watching, my friends. I'll see you all in the next video.